West transferred its polluting industries to countries like China and India. It also transferred labor-intensive businesses to countries like India, and we certainly benefited from it. And the reluctance of Western nations to now put up
So I think that needs to happen, but I do want to emphasize that, for example, another course, apart from the sustainable investing course, is that what I realized at Harvard Business School and at the campus generally is that a lot of the climate and ESG kind of work is very much oriented towards what's going on in America, North America, OECD countries. In a place like India, things are much different. I totally like to your earlier point.
Yeah.
If you are, I sometimes we forget about it, us Indians, like 70% of India has still not been built. Now think about it, 70% of India has still not been built. And what do you need to build it? You need more power, you need steel, you need cement, you need a whole variety of things which currently are some of the most polluting industries in the world. So how do you balance that development growth agenda with a climate agenda? Because at the same time you can say, well, I need to grow, so forget about climate. At the same time, you need to think about, like I said before in Mumbai, if you map heat zones, some of the biggest heat zones where people will not be able to live are in India.
No, I completely take your point. Yeah. And it's not to argue against the importance of it. And in the more recent context, I know everybody in the audience is aware of those visuals were horrifying. An entire Heidel project was washed away by a flood, and that's absolutely horrifying. And apart from the loss of human life, you're seeing what is happening, for example, in certain tunneling projects. We have a kind of geography and geology which is also adverse. So it's very important for India, but you made this point. What do Indian companies do from here? What can Indian companies do to sort of face up to the ESG challenge and yet remain profitable? Because they are answerable to shareholders, sir.
Totally. So that's exactly what I started with, that if you go with a mindset that if I do something in ESG, it's because I need to save the world, as opposed to that this is good business, then that in itself is a not sustainable mindset.
Can I interrupt you here for context?
Yes.
Many years back, when the government and certain bureaucrat decided that corporate social responsibility now needs to be built into statute via parliament, and a certain percentage of profits needs to be earmarked for it, corporate India couldn't digest that in the initial years, and ultimately, since it became a mandate, we saw innovative sort of stretching of the concept of CSR in the deployment of funds. So is it required by mandate to frog march Indian companies towards ESG, or do you think it's a shareholder task?
So a very great question. So I'll tell you the framework we use at Harvard, and you may want to think about this. Any company, whether it be big, small, whatever size, doesn't matter. You can cut it down to you basically have 4 stakeholders. And who are those 4 stakeholders? Your investors, like you said, your customers, and without them you don't have a company, your employees, without them you don't have a company, and the community that which you operate in. You are actually operating in a community, in an environment, and that community, and that part of it is the government and the regulation, but just the community that you're operating in has to give you the license to operate, because if they don't give you the license to operate, you won't be able to run your business. So if you think about stakeholders in that 4 contexts, investors, now yes, if you are short-term oriented, I want to trade, which is the best stock to sell here, there, then sustainability is not an issue. But I think more and more investors, especially foreign investors, and I think a lot of the institutional investors here, have a longer-term time horizon. I think that if you have a longer-term time horizon of 3 years plus, sustainability, even if it comes at a near-term profit thing, because of the multiple growth and because investors are smart investors, they understand, these are not inconsistent. Kind of focusing on ESG issues and creating long-term value are not inconsistent. It's good business, so 1. 2 is, I find, and I don't know whether it's happening in India yet, but at least in the West, people actually, if you look at 5 companies in one industry, same industry, and the talent is saying, well, if companies that are more ESG-oriented, climate-oriented, better kind of a place to work in from an environment standpoint, like a kind of a community standpoint, I'd rather work there than company A rather than company B in the same industry. So you're finding that the actual demand for talent is creating a huge push. So that's 1. 3rd is customers. I think right now there's a lot of talk when customers say, I want this green product, that green product, but they're not willing to pay for it. So that's great. You can say that, but if you're not willing to pay for it, why bother? But I do think that over time, there'll be this so-called green premium, that companies that actually have more of a green product will say. And then the fourth is regulation. I think having some degree of regulation has pushed the West, and I think some degree of regulation here is probably needed to kind of help accelerate the kind of decarbonization agenda.